So obviously from that, you can imagine that nearly every day I see people say goodbye, and it can be really difficult to watch. Um, and many days it makes me shed a tear or two. See, I don't like goodbyes. I never have. Quite honestly, they scare me. As a kid, we'd go visiting with family, and we'd pile in the car when the visit was over, and we'd drive off, waving at the family or the friends, and I would hide my tears. Um, we would visit my grandmother. She lived the very far half a block away as a kid, and when it was time to go home, I would start to walk home, and then I would turn around for one more hug goodbye. And when I was about 9 or 10, my BFF in the 80s was moving to another nearby neighborhood, but I was afraid I would never see him again. Each year, my grandparents would take my sister and I from Illinois to Kentucky to visit my great-grandparents, whom we called Mom and Pop. They were in their 90s, and we would spend a week with them. My sister and I would pick vegetables with Pop um, up on the hill behind his house, and we would sit on the floor in their living room and play solitaire side by side. And together, we would all enjoy oatmeal cream pies. Those are really what I remember about these trips. When it would be time to leave, we would all load up my grandparents' van, and then my great-grandfather would simply disappear. My grandmother always said, Pop, he just doesn't like goodbyes. So I guess I came by my fear of goodbyes, honestly. One year we went down to Kentucky, and my grandfather's beloved hound dog, Jack, was no longer there. And I asked my grandmother and my great-grandmother where Jack went. And they just simply said, it was time. Jack knew, and he didn't want to say goodbye. So he just wandered off. The first person whose funeral I ever attended was my speech teacher, Mrs. McIntyre. She had helped me learn how to enunciate and pronounce those difficult and challenging words from the time I was about 2-ish until I was about 11. I hadn't seen her in about a year, and so it was a surprise to me that she had been ill, and I found out in 6th grade math class that she had died. My mother took me to the local funeral home, and we sat in one of those parlors for her funeral. Her son stood up and addressed the crowd, and he talked about death being like a ship, that while we on this shore were sad and scared to see that ship depart, we needed to remember how excited and joyous the people on that distant shore were when that ship finally arrived. Why didn't I like goodbyes? Well, simply put, they were so permanent. I mean, the idea of never seeing a person again was scary. I wasn't a morbid kid. That may be hard to believe. I work in a cemetery, but I was an easily attached kid. And just the idea of saying goodbye to someone and not knowing if I'd see them again was really very horrifying for me. I mean, who doesn't want one more minute with someone that they love, that they're leaving or that's leaving them? I transferred to the University of Hawaii in 1995 as a 19-year-old. And I said goodbye to my family and gave everyone a hug, even though as Midwesterners, we are not huggers, really. Not knowing, if it would be the last time I would see any of them. I didn't know I wouldn't see my grandmother again. What I would do for a hug, right now, from my beloved little Graham. So yes, I work at Oakwood Cemetery, and I have the honor of standing at many, many, many graveside services. I watch families, even from afar, say goodbye to their loved ones. I've seen them trace their fingers along the grain of the casket before they walk to their cars, giving one last glance as they say goodbye. I've seen families kiss their fingers and place them on the urn before they leave, as they say goodbye to those earthly remains. And I have learned that goodbyes come in all shapes and sizes. There's really no wrong way to say goodbye. And perhaps they're not to be feared. So I left in 1995 to go to Hawaii. And by the April of 1997, my beloved little grandmother was gone. And it was a month before I was supposed to graduate from college. And my parents said, "You do not have the time to come home. You're almost about to graduate. You need to stay there." Here I was, her youngest grandchild, I believe the favorite, maybe not. And I wanted to say goodbye. So I had to find a way. And I remember walking out of my house onto Kailua Beach and sitting down in that sand, watching those waves roll in at my toes. I remember hearing the roar of the ocean and feeling very small in this giant, giant world. But I did not feel alone. And at that same moment, I was finding a way to say goodbye to this woman who had meant the world to me. My family was back home in Illinois, honoring her with a funeral. But I found my way through the ocean and the texture of the sand, which I can still feel on my fingers. And even though I was that kid that was afraid to say goodbye after little outings, I myself have had to find a way to say goodbye to people that mean something to me in different ways than sitting at that beach. About almost 2 years ago, I had a very dear friend, a work colleague and friend, who was very ill and in the hospital. And he called me one evening, as was often the case in those few weeks while he was there, and we would just shoot the breeze, chit chat, catch up, talk about what was happening in our worlds. And we made tentative plans for future adventures. No, but I think it scared us. I mean, I know it scared me to get my hopes up to have a future adventure. And he might have sensed that trepidation in my voice, or maybe he felt it too. And he said, our friendship is important, and we are going to be okay because of our friendship. 3 weeks later, he was gone. But the idea and the actuality of that conversation stays in my heart today. So how does someone who is afraid of goodbyes work at a cemetery? I often ask myself this. How did I get here? Well, I think to me, maybe there are no goodbyes at a cemetery. Maybe the people that we lay to rest at Oakwood and everywhere else, they live on through their stories, through their memories, and it's really not a goodbye. And strangely, I have always felt that way. I'm from this little town, Downers Grove in Illinois, and my parents, don't think this was neglect, they would leave me at the little town graveyard on the main street of Downers Grove. And they would shop or they would bank anywhere but the library. I would stay in the cemetery. And I would wander the little rows and read the names of the streets that I know from my, and I loved it. I can still picture it today. When I was in Hawaii, I found this amazing woman that became my cemetery mentor. Yes, one exists. She might be the only one. And she helped me understand how cemeteries can play a role in all of our lives, and about the culture and the lives of the people who lived in Hawaii. And in graduate school, I worked with the Illinois Amish, and I learned about how they have death and burial and funeral customs, and how they use cemeteries for the dead and for the living, and even for their living horses. I mean, who knew? And at Oakwood Cemetery here in Raleigh, how can you possibly be afraid? It's meant for the living. And it has these curvy, windy roads and these beautiful, peaceful and pastoral settings. And you'll see deer and foxes and hawks. And there is no possible way to be afraid. A cemetery is simply a repository for the dead and a museum for the living. So what I feared about death as a child, I learned to understand and embrace through my job and just through life. I mean, I have learned to live your life so that your goodbye isn't the most important part, to leave nothing on the table. So if you want to run back and go hug your grandmother one more time, for all of us who can't, go do that. And tell your friends and family that you love them. Don't wait until the goodbyes to make your feelings known. And when it comes to the final goodbye, live it up. Make it matter. I don't know what comes next. No clue. And seeing all these graveside services have not given me any clear answer. But I hope that when my ship arrives at that distant shore, that I am no longer afraid of all those goodbyes that I had to make to get on that ship. But I'm excited to be able to say all those hellos. Thank you.